So I've been asked to talk about the impact of Kenan Rifai as a teacher, and I think we can see this most immediately in two places. Of course, his activities took place many decades in the past, but I do think it's fair to say that their impact continues today. Now, in his own time, there were two places where his teachings were influential or visible, and these were in his publications, although some of them were circulated privately or in the form of lectures, and secondly in the people who were his students and who listened to his message. So as far as the publications are concerned, we are starting to learn more about them now through English publications that are aimed at new audiences, but several of them that are most typical are probably his biography of Sheikh Ahmed Rifâî, his lectures or sohbetler, which were discourses given to live audiences, and his commentary on the Masnavi. There are other works as well, but these are good examples. And I think that they also illustrate the style of oral teaching that he employed. In other words, you can almost hear him speaking in the kind of informal and direct style that is adopted in some of these writings. And they are not overly academic in the bad sense of the term. In other words, they're presented in a lively and interesting fashion, which is designed to bring the listener in. And so it's not surprising that these types of teachings, in fact, were influential among a significant number of his students. Now, it's also important to recognize that among his students in this sort of transformed world after the end of the Ottoman Empire and the beginning of the secular Turkish state, Kenan Rifai had a number of students who were women, who were highly educated, and who were assuming positions of leadership. And this is a significant social change from the admittedly patriarchal forms of social organization that were dominant in societies where Sufism had thrived in previous times. So these impacts are kind of hard to deny. I would also like to underline the striking nature of his adaptation to the new environment after the foundation of the secular republic. He had been intimately involved in the traditional teachings of Sufism and New Arabic and Persian, and part of a milieu where a significant number of Muslims in Turkey were part of the tariqats. According to some estimates, as many as 1 out of 8 men in Istanbul before the First World War was an active member of a Sufi tekke. That all changed after 1925 with the dissolution of the Sufi orders and the takeover of their properties by the state. And yet, Kenan Rifai did not greet this new situation with despair or condemnation, but responded to it in a surprisingly creative fashion by regarding it as an opportunity for a new type of relationship, a new kind of context for Sufi teaching. And it is also very notable that in his own career, he was professionally involved with education for many years throughout his life, including teaching French and other secular subjects. And so he was personally very familiar with the new forms of education that were becoming dominant. And so he proclaimed with a rather revolutionary implication that he saw the future of Sufism in an academic context. Now, this is becoming an interesting juxtaposition through some new developments that have been made possible by his students and followers in very recent years. And these have been the foundation of two professorial chairs which have been named in his memory. And one of them I know quite well because it is at the university where I have been teaching for over 20 years, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And we are immensely grateful at University of North Carolina for those whose generosity made possible this chair. This kind of private support is extremely important at public universities and makes it possible to do things that we cannot otherwise achieve. Now, the existence of these chairs, what does it make possible for us to do? Well, first of all, it does not go back and replicate the structures of authority that were found in the Sufi tariqats in the Ottoman Empire. This is not the purpose of this type of organization or institution. Instead, I think it's a recognition that the university has a role to play in opening up the discussion of religion as a space where conversations can take place and engagements can take place that anyone in society can participate in. And this is very important because in many traditional religious communities, the price of admission is to be submissive to the authority of those who are dictating the theology of a particular teaching. And there is only one way to go, and the situation is defined by tradition that is not to be questioned. And in addition, I think we're in a situation where the traditional systems themselves cannot function in the same way that they used to. It's simply not possible. That is, in a complex society with many different religious groups, ethnic groups, philosophies, secular people, religious people, it is not possible to assert the authority of one particular group and say, you must listen to us and do what we say. We have to come to understandings of ethics that can be shared by people from different backgrounds. And I think that this kind of formation of ethical communities that are not dictated by political allegiance, nationality, or religion, this is something that can be assisted by the creative use of institutions like the Kenan Rifai chairs. We are hoping that this kind of institution will allow us now to extend our networks of collaboration internationally and to cement the kind of relationships that we have been forming over the past recent years. I have been invited to many of the conferences that have been sponsored by the Turkish Women's Cultural Association and its allied organizations such as the Vakfı and now the Kerim Foundation, as well as municipalities throughout Turkey. And it's been, I think, a very healthy way of creating new engagements and linkages. And these are the objectives of higher education at this time. We can no longer afford to be provincial and locked away in our own narrow visions. How does this help us in North Carolina? I should I have to acknowledge this with a certain amount of hesitation, and reluctance that we have ideological situations in America that are extremely troubling. And I'm referring here to the anti-Islamic prejudice that we have recently been calling Islamophobia. And this is a negative and pernicious kind of attitude which partakes of the worst qualities of racial prejudice and anti-Semitic religious bigotry, and in many cases is being presented in the same way that these vicious philosophies have been presented in the past. And regrettably, I mean, even in our own town of Chapel Hill, we experienced a shock just a few months ago when 3 Muslim students were murdered, and it was a senseless action which it is hard to separate from the atmosphere of anti-Muslim hostility that is being actively promoted by well-financed groups in the United States. How do we respond to that kind of negativity? On one level, that is to say, we are not going to respond through the mass media and through the kinds of cheap images that are used in the news and in Hollywood movies, because simply to mount another advertising campaign in opposition would not be effective and would be using the same tools that we are opposed to. It is education that is our most important hope and our greatest tool. And education works by direct contact and not through online courses or the mass media. In other words, when I get 180 students in my class on early Islamic civilization, and I see them all, and they work closely with me and my graduate students, something happens. And I promise them that they will know in a few weeks 1,000 times more about Islam than the average American congressman. I'm sad to say this is true. But, and they recognize that. So the Kenan Rifai Chair at University of North Carolina was launched in 2009, and we made an appointment in 2011 of Professor Juliana Hammer, a German-trained academic who had done research on the Palestinian diaspora in her PhD from Berlin, and has moved on to do research on Islam and gender, Islam in America, and she's also interested in Sufism. And so she is a very fine and extraordinary scholar. When I have wanted something done and done properly, she is the person that first comes to mind. And she has worked with me on a project to assemble a series of essays on Islamophobia, which we produced in 2013. And I feel like her work was an absolutely essential portion of that publication, where she talked about the element of gender, the way in which Islamophobia brings out the negative stereotypes of Muslim women, as well as the images of Muslim men. In other words, there is a way in which masculinity and femininity are being constructed in a particularly negative fashion. And she's put her finger on how this works. And together, we are responsible for training. We have currently 10 PhD students in the Islamic Studies concentration in our department. Since 2003, there are 9 PhD graduates who we have produced and are now teaching at some of the most illustrious private liberal arts colleges and research universities in North America. And we're very proud of them. We feel that our program in Islamic Studies is doing something that's not being done elsewhere. There are only 35 PhD programs in religious studies in North America, and only half of them, in other words, about 18, offer Islamic studies as a field. But the demand is immense because, and I think everyone will be struck by this who is not familiar with the American situation. There are over 1,400 colleges and universities in America that have a department of religious studies. And I think that this is unusual. In Europe, we don't find this at all. There are departments of theology where they're teaching religion from the inside, from authoritative points of view, and area studies, in other words, Middle East or South Asia or something like that. And maybe a few places like the École Pratique in Paris, you'll find a department of religious studies, but it's kind of almost put in quarantine there because of French secularism. And occasionally there's a program in the Middle East or Asia, but the Ilahiyat faculties in Turkey don't, some of them are close in spirit, but because of their association with the government, I think it's rather different. In short, we use the study of religion in America to think about identity and diversity and pluralism in very important ways. The study of Islam was at the very beginning absent from that discussion. In other words, in 1973 at the annual conference of the American Academy of Religion, there was one paper given about the study of Islam. Now over 200 papers are presented at the annual conference, and we have a tremendous growth in the professional cohort of graduate students, teachers, professors around the country. But we're still very far short of the demand, because I think that only about 15% of the departments of religious studies actually have someone who's trained in the field. So remember that in America, the Muslim population is under 1%. The chances are that most Americans have actually never met a Muslim. So they get their information from either the news media or Hollywood movies. This is why education is really crucial as a way to shift the balance on this. And we're still, as I said, behind in supplying those teachers. So we have formulated a concept of Islamic studies that we have worked on for the past 2 decades. And this is based upon integrating Islamic studies with the humanities and social sciences and also with the arts. Because the problem has been that we've had Orientalism, which is off in one corner. It's brutally isolated by its insistence on strict philology and completely unconnected to the theories of social science, ethnography, literary theory, gender studies, and all of the changes that have taken place in the academy in the past 50 years. There are still places in America, which I won't go into, where Orientalism is basically still unchanged. So to have a form of Islamic studies that is connected, this is what we are proposing. And so the Kenan Rifai Chair is a vital part of that program. And I'm hopeful that our approach, our methods, which we are introducing, will have a larger impact throughout the American Academy and on the many students who come through our doors. Because, as I mentioned, I teach a class with 180 students. We get hundreds of students per year just between myself and Juliana Hammer, and we are expecting a postdoctoral fellow for a couple of years who may be joining us if we are fortunate, someone who works in the field of Islamic theology, so that we need to have those additional resources. So I'll say just one more word, and I've asked to comment about the qualities of Kenan Rifai, and I think this is a little bit more difficult to pin down because that's an easier judgment for people to make who are within direct contact with an individual like him. But let me go to the word charisma. We have this word which we use in English to describe people who have a gift. It is a lot easier to describe the effects of that gift than the gift itself. In other words, you can see the impact. You can see the way that people are transformed, but it's hard to put your finger on exactly what the nature of that ability is. But some politicians have it. Clearly, prophets and religious leaders of all kinds have had that. And so, judging from the effects, Kenan Rifai had that kind of charisma. It's interesting because his pictures are very, very quiet, but there is this kind of intensity of effect. The last thing I would say is to go back into the question of education and the Rifai chairs. And I mentioned how our vision of Islamic studies is not only connected to the humanities and social sciences, but also to the arts. And I think this is another place where Kenan Rifai comes in as a useful example, because he was deeply interested in calligraphy and the arts as he knew them. You can do things with the arts that you cannot do any other way. In other words, through a lecture or through a book or through an analysis. Yes, you can make progress. You can actually do a lot. But with a powerful performance that has a quality, the cultural and spiritual qualities that are possible in artistic performance, that's, I think, an area that we really want to emphasize. And so I'm going to be making some proposals about things that we can do together between universities on the international level, not only in terms of conferences, but engaging with the arts, that will bring Islamic studies into the mainstream and help to humanize the subject in a way that hasn't been done before. This won't be possible without educational resources. And so I think that the Kenan Rifai chairs are going to be very important. The one in China is very striking, in part because China has been through such a turbulent century of revolution, of the Communist Party domination, with policies that were extremely hostile to religion of any kind, and indeed suppressing religion in sometimes extremely brutal fashion. This is not a secret. China is coming into new prominence now, and their universities are seeking international recognition, and in the areas of science and technology, they've done a lot. Of course, that's undeniable. China had an interesting experience in the colonial period. If I'm going too long, you can cut me off, but in the colonial period, like many other countries who were impacted by Western powers, they confronted a series of concepts that were being developed by Europeans for their own reasons. And the Chinese had to ask themselves, how do we understand this, and does this apply to us? And the same conversations took place in India and in the Middle East and elsewhere. The concept of religion. It's not exactly the same as any term that you can find in Arabic. the concept of society. You can go on throughout a whole list of things. But when the Chinese thought about the term religion, they were not entirely comfortable with it because the elite in China considered themselves to be beyond superstition and the things which villagers perform as rituals and so forth. So they thought that maybe religion was something for the masses, and that the literati, the Chinese scholars who ran the empire, from Confucian perspectives, they thought that was more like philosophy because it had a more elite appearance. So in other words, the term religion was not eagerly embraced in China, and the question of is there a Chinese religion was hotly debated. And in scholarship, it was rather late that this came into use as a term. And as far as minority groups who have particular religious identities, the Chinese have been historically rather nervous about them. And they see religion as a potential threat, as a potential source of revolution. They're not very friendly at all towards the Dalai Lama, who's regarded as somebody who wants to split Tibet off from Chinese authority. And the Muslims in China, particularly in Xinjiang, have been treated with very discriminatory policies. So in China, religion is not a subject that they're very comfortable with. I am extremely pleased that Professor Tu Wei-ming, who's extremely well known and respected and was at Harvard University for many years, has taken an active role in the formation of the new institute in Peking University, where the Kenan Rifai Chair is located. And I think under his leadership, it's going to be possible to bring about new conversations on the subjects of religion, and particularly Islam, which are going to be healthy and productive for the Chinese Academy. My impression has been that they are still more comfortable talking about philosophy and rather than religion. And I recently have been approached by somebody who's asked to come as a visiting scholar to North Carolina, who is a Chinese academic who has been teaching in the principal university of Urumqi in Xinjiang, where about 1/3 of the students are Hui Muslims. He feels like he does not have the equipment intellectually to understand Islam, and so he wants to come to America to study with us, to acquire those intellectual resources. This is the kind of collaboration that we can undertake, and so we have some other plans which we are working on for conferences and performance-related projects. And so I am hoping that we can do this in a way that unites, that builds on the relationships that we've already formed between Turkey and North Carolina. Let me also underline the fact that the creation of the Kenan Rifai chairs at the University of North Carolina was an extraordinary action insofar as it is the first time that a professorship was created in the College of Arts and Sciences by a group living outside of America. It was under the leadership of Cemalnur Sargut and the Turkish Women's Cultural Association that this took place. And we feel that this is a far-sighted action which is for the benefit of everyone who is interested to participate, and that it is not advancing one particular notion of religion or authority over other groups. In other words, I don't think that anyone who regards themselves as secular has anything to worry about from this type of academic institution, because it is not concerned with or attempting to replicate any of these traditional authorities. Instead, it is trying to empower anyone who is interested in understanding the history, nature, future of religion and spirituality, how else can we do it than through education and through the university, in a place where we can all meet on a level of respect. And the chief qualifications are going to be to demonstrate that you have the capacity to study and to use argument and to use evidence and to learn from others. So those are the objectives which we have on our part, and we feel there is a meeting of the minds on this in terms of our relationship with the supporters of the Kenan Rifai chair, that we share certain ideals that are not, as I said, that are not limited or defined by any political, national, religious, or ethnic group. These are about fostering the ideals of ethical community that should be for all humanity. That's what we hope to do.
Can you have a few words about the symposium?
Right. I was trying to count how many times I've come to Turkey in the past decade for a conference, and I'm pretty sure it's every year, and sometimes more than once. And I've come to conferences that TÜRKKAD has been organizing, as well as other groups, I should add, frequently. And so one thing that we have come to expect and to admire is the, first of all, the quality of the program. And the speakers have been carefully selected from universities in Turkey and abroad, and some of them have become regular favorites here and have established their credentials through really effective presentations. So the program itself is very high quality. It's also unmistakable that the organization and arrangements are on a very high level. And I've been going to academic conferences for decades, and I have to say it is hard to find examples of conferences that put so much care and attention to every detail. And this is appreciated. This is deeply appreciated. And the attitude of the people involved is so enthusiastic that it is a great pleasure to participate. So joining these conferences and presenting papers often has meant that I have taken up a subject which I wasn't particularly planning to do. It hadn't been part of my agenda. Well, that's fine, because we undertake academic projects in order to communicate to audiences, and so there needs to be a kind of give and take between the intellectual agenda that one has formulated in the past and the needs that people have that come up. So I've been asked to speak about Ottoman poets who I hadn't really spent any time on, and that's been extremely enjoyable. This conference, I think, has been really nice, and I regret that I had to arrive late for reasons that were beyond my control. But we had some very inspiring presentations today that were very well crafted, and that's always a pleasure. So we're not quite done, but I anticipate a fitting and extremely positive conclusion.